It's a late night, Friday night. You get back home from being out with your friends around town. You're tired, you feel exhausted, burned, ready for the weekend. So you get ready, brush your teeth, put on your pajamas, and you go to bed. And then at some point in the night, you wake up and it sounds like there's an intruder in your house. And you go to get up and get out of bed, but you can't. And you start to panic. You can't move your arms. You can't move your legs. You can't get out of bed. And you start to tell yourself, relax, this is just a dream. This isn't happening. I'm not awake right now. But you know that that's wrong. And you know that you are awake. And just as you say that, you see your door open, and a shadowy figure step into your room from your living room. You start to panic, and again, you can't do anything. You can't move, you can't get out of bed, and just when you think it's too late, all of a sudden, you can get up. This is sleep paralysis. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the science behind that.
Welcome to The Science Behind That with Atticus Hamilton.
Hello, all you scientists. Welcome on back to The Science Behind That podcast. I am your host, Atticus Hamilton, and as you heard from the intro, yes, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about sleep paralysis. You know, what it is, where it comes from, you know, why we deal with it, and hopefully by the end of today's episode, you'll feel more comfortable about sleep paralysis, you know, if it ends up being something that happens to you. Hopefully it doesn't. It only affects around 20% of the population. But before we get too much into that, this episode idea actually came to me as per a suggestion from one of you guys. So thank you to the person that suggested this episode. And really quickly, you know, if you guys ever have any like episode ideas or topics or whatnot that, you know, you really think that I should cover, feel free to send me an email at thesciencebt@gmail.com. I'd love to, you know, hear your ideas of topics and of questions that you've been asking about everyday life. And do an episode on that. And who knows, maybe we've already done an episode on that, and that's there for you guys to take a look at. So feel free to do that. And of course, one other thing before we jump into today's episode, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite all of you to go grab yourselves a nice steaming hot cup of coffee, add a little bit of maple syrup to it, and we're going to jump right in. So what is sleep paralysis, right? Well, sleep paralysis is basically defined by the Merck manual as a condition that results in a temporary loss of muscle movement or atonia, either immediately after falling asleep and entering REM stage or immediately before waking up. And so that's the basic generation. That's a basic definition of sleep paralysis. But in most situations, sleep paralysis tends to be a symptom of an underlying condition. And of course, we're going to talk about that. So I mentioned in the intro, basically, that 20% of the population will experience sleep paralysis at some point in their life. I have never experienced it. I have heard, I guess, horror stories from people that have, but I have never actually experienced sleep paralysis. Excuse me, I need to take a coffee break there. But there are two different broad classes or broad categorizations of sleep paralysis, right? So you have intermittent sleep paralysis, and usually this is what we see in a lot of people, right? So this is a sleep paralysis that results not from an underlying condition. So usually like sleep deprivation or working, I guess, a late night shift or a graveyard shift and messing with the circadian rhythm. Things like that can cause this intermittent sleep paralysis. And usually it's a sporadic thing, right? Usually it's like a sporadic thing, and people who experience intermittent sleep paralysis are not generally gonna experience it every night. When I worked at Mayo Clinic, I used to work on the 2 to 12:30 shift, and I always thought I was gonna experience sleep paralysis from that. I never did, but I know people who do work shifts like that tend to experience it or be at a higher risk of experiencing that than others. But anyway, so that's intermittent sleep paralysis. And then the other type of sleep paralysis is chronic sleep paralysis. And usually this is as a result of an underlying condition like narcolepsy or obstructive sleep apnea. So usually with the case of chronic sleep paralysis, the sleep paralysis is a symptom as opposed to a condition. But in general, what do people with sleep paralysis usually experience? Paralysis in your limbs, obviously, or also called atonia. So atonia is the term for when you lose all control over your muscles specifically. That's called atonia. Inability to speak, right? Because if you can't move your muscles, you obviously can't talk. Sense of suffocation is very common. Hallucinations, fear, panic, helplessness, tightening around your throat, and then daytime sleepiness. Now, usually with the daytime sleepiness, that's seen more in narcolepsy patients. So, generally speaking, so what happens, right? So generally speaking, somebody will go to bed, and there's different stages of sleep, right? And I think we all know that. So you have like a light sleep stage, and you have a deep sleep stage, and you have REM, and you have wake, I guess, if you want to consider waking stage of sleep. I mean, anyway. So in a very basic sense, it's waking stage, rapid eye movement stage, light sleep, and deep sleep. And deep sleep is often considered the, regenerative stage of sleep, whereas REM is where we dream, generally. So usually people will have sleep paralysis episodes right before they enter REM, or right before they go from deep sleep into a waking stage. So usually it'll be around there where people will experience these episodes of sleep paralysis. And a lot of times, people won't be able to move, but a lot of times it's almost like they're in a state of semi-consciousness. They're kind of awake. Because a lot of times what happens is their dreams sort of bleed into reality. So when a patient is experiencing sleep paralysis, a lot of them report seeing shadowy figures, hearing someone breaking in, a sense of fear, sometimes seeing a continuation of their dream in reality around them. So in the intro, the example I gave where you see a shadowy figure going from your living room to your bedroom, that could totally be something that would happen in a sleep paralysis episode, and that a lot of times is how that manifests for a lot of people. I know generally only 20% of people have experienced this, but if any of you out there have experienced this, I would love to know. That would be really cool to compare your experiences with what I guess the literature as a whole says. If any of you want to share that, gladly share that with all the listeners, in a follow-up episode to this. Or if you have had any different experiences, let me know. But usually, usually sleep paralysis is pretty easy to identify. It's not that hard to diagnose when somebody has sleep paralysis. The symptoms are pretty much a big beacon telling you what they have, what is actually going on. But so sleep paralysis is a massive symptom. It's a big index symptom of narcolepsy. So for those of you that don't know, narcolepsy is a condition that basically that's basically where the patient's brain has a hard time regulating sleep and wake cycles. So, another common symptom of narcolepsy that we see in the clinical field is, randomly falling asleep or having micro episodes of sleep, basically. The patient will be fine and normal and just going about their day, and then boom, they'll just go to sleep. A lot of times that's how it expresses, but the other symptom of that is sleep paralysis. Now, I guess the next question is, how can you stop it? How can you treat it? Unfortunately, there's no medication specifically for sleep paralysis. That being said, if your sleep paralysis is as a result of narcolepsy, then drugs like modafinil are designed to treat narcolepsy. And in fact, we spoke about modafinil in an episode not too long ago where we talked about nootropics. But modafinil is designed to treat narcolepsy, and in treating narcolepsy, that may help with the sleep paralysis if that is actually from the narcolepsy. And how would you diagnose narcolepsy? The same way you would basically diagnose sleep paralysis. An overnight sleep study, also called a polysomnogram, or a multiple sleep latency test, and that measures how quickly the patient falls asleep and what kinds of stages of sleep they're experiencing during that time. And usually that will help the physician identify narcolepsy and also sleep paralysis. I think overall the moral of the story is that for those of you out there who have experienced intermittent sleep paralysis, just because you've experienced one episode, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to become a chronic thing that happens, on a regular basis. And it, as we mentioned in the beginning of the episode, intermittent sleep paralysis can be a result of stress at work. It could be a result of, being changed to a night shift, or just chronic sleep deprivation. There's a lot of different things there that may be causing intermittent sleep paralysis. And I think if you are experiencing that, I think the best way to go about stopping that, as long as it's not being caused by narcolepsy, is probably going to first be try and identify, what are you doing differently, right? So on nights where you experience a sleep paralysis, what did you do differently than nights when you didn't experience the sleep paralysis? And who knows, maybe it's, on, Wednesday night, I drank coffee before I went to bed, and then I had an episode of sleep paralysis, whereas when I didn't do that, I didn't have that. So maybe that's the cause. That's how I would go about, I guess, self-diagnosing it. But that they say, it's not good for doctors, or especially aspiring doctors like myself, to do self-diagnosis because, I don't know. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Science Behind That. I know it's Monday, Monday is my least favorite day of the week as well. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope it gives you a little motivation, I guess, to get through your weeks. I will see you guys all on Friday, and until then, remember, ladies and gentlemen, stand up and question everything.